Thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Katie. I'm the Resource and Transformation Director at Omni. Welcome to your panel discussion today. The topic is all around creating an inclusive infrastructure to attract a diverse pool of candidates. So when we think about our infrastructure, we're thinking about everything from how we create our job descriptions all the way through the attraction selection process. So a fairly sizable topic to try and discuss in the next half an hour, but luckily I'm joined by a great panel. So before we get into some of the kind of set questions that we've got, if I can just ask each of you to do a very quick introduction, really focusing on the topic and the challenges that topic of today and the challenges that you're kind of facing around that. Suzanne, do you want to go first?
Hello, I'm Suzanne Smedo. I head up Culture, Diversity and Wellbeing for Ofcom. And yeah, you've already heard from Kerry about some of the work we're doing, so I'm looking forward to sharing.
Hi, I'm Hugh Fordham. I'm the CEO of Holaroo. We build talent relationship platforms for clients, running passive candidates, onboarding, alumni, things like that. So we've got some good stuff to share. Oh.
Hi, I'm Catherine Gallen and I'm the Commercial Director of a company called The Pipeline, which does leadership development for women. So we get women onto executive committees and also into senior management roles. And I'm also a non-executive director of a recruitment company called Starting Point Recruitment, which is all about social mobility within the West Midlands.
And I'm James Crichton. I'm the head of assessment for Omni. So I'm joining, although the assessment part is an important part for attraction, which we're talking about now. So it's kind of linking all of that through. And I'm currently also trying to Google the predictive validity of curiosity following Kerry Ann's dropping me in it earlier on.
Thank you very much, everyone. Suzanne, can I come to you first? So D&I lead at Ofcom. How do you, or how have you created that inclusive infrastructure to attract the candidates that you need, the talent that you need into your organisation?
Well, for me, the most important thing that's Ofcom's done to make a difference is really focusing on the whole systems thinking around talent. So in particular, we have a diversity and inclusion strategy. Most organisations do. But I think the thing that really made a difference is the things that Kerry was talking about earlier. We've embedded it as part of our transformation programme. So the messages around diversity and inclusion are talents for diversity inclusion, our targets for diversity inclusion are truly embedded throughout the organisation. It's not just something that you'll hear from the talent section, from our people in transformation. It's throughout everything, and that's really made a big difference for us.
Is there anything particularly that you can share that's working for you, that's really working for you when it comes to that infrastructure?
So, for example, as part of the launch of the strategy in 2021, it also coincided with the launch of a real different approach to career and performance management. And as part of that, our line managers received training on all sorts of things about the importance of our brand, our message, why we work here, the strategic purpose of the organisation, how to coach. But also within that, there were the key messages about the kind of things that you should be saying and delivering to colleagues as you're bringing them on board, as you're onboarding them, as you're actually talking to potential candidates. So really already seeding those messages of inclusion into the expectation of what they're doing. Another element that there's quite a few is the outreach. So not only getting the inclusive recruitment right and those processes, but finding ways to kind of just pivot slightly and say, right, it's not just about us choosing a candidate, it's creating the environments where they would want to choose us, so our well-being, our ability to be seen at those key places, those key events and activities where our talent might be, really thinking about being a bit more innovative.
That's really great, thank you. And actually, we will circle back on some of them themes because I think it's important to think about, they're very internal, aren't they? So how do we make them external? How do we let people know? So we'll definitely circle back if we've got time at the end. Thank you. Hugh, as you have the microphone, I will come to you next. I suppose building on some of the themes that Suzanne has discussed there, how can organisations remove some of the barriers within the recruitment infrastructure to ensure they are attracting and retaining the talent that they need?
Yeah, and it's good that you use the word barriers, because I think when we talk to people about some of these challenges, one of the things is a mental model, which is rather than pushing people to do things, think about the barriers that are stopping them doing things and removing those barriers. It's much easier to do. So typically, the sort of top three, if you like, is perceptions of the organisation. You know, what people think of the organisation, and that may be preventing them from considering you in the first place. When you're thinking about a diverse audience, there's often quite a variety in the level of knowledge that people have, and that could be knowledge about where they could fit within an organisation, even just knowledge about recruitment processes, you know, can vary very enormously. So being aware of that and trying to address the concerns around that. And then messaging, if you're thinking about a diverse audience, you've got to have a diverse message as well, because different people respond to different types of messaging. And if you've just got one way of talking to your audience, that's naturally going to not attract a diverse range of people.
How do you identify where the barriers are? How can organisations, or where have you seen it work well, where they think about some great examples, but how can they do that? How can they really think about where the barriers are?
Yeah, well, I mean, the barriers, if you think about it, are obvious. I mean, we're going to, I think, talk about data later on, yeah. and we've talked about that. And one of the things I always say is understanding your audience, you know, is the first step of working out what to do. And one of the things I always struggle with a bit is organisations look at a very small snapshot of their people, which are the people who've applied for a job with them. And you need to add in all of those people who were potentially considering a job with you and then didn't actually apply. And often that data is completely missing. So having that data and then interrogating that about, okay, you didn't apply. Why didn't you apply? What were the barriers? What were the things that caused you concerns? Getting more information and then acting on it.
Definitely, and I completely agree. I think we're all, when we think about data, we're all probably very good at collecting data when things are going well, but it's when it's all the candidates that perhaps didn't apply, like you say, or also were regretted from the process in some way. So it is, looking at all of that. Thank you for that. Catherine, can I come to you next? Partnerships and programmes, and we talked about this on our roundtable as well, work really well when they're embedded within an organisation. Can you talk to us about the impact that you have seen on organisations when in some of the programmes that you have delivered, when they have been really embedded?
Okay, so some of this is going to hark back to what Suzanne's mentioned, is you've got to get CEO buy-in. If you don't get CEO buy-in, you are not going to make a change for any of your DEI programmes. So whilst we have diversity and inclusion being well-intentioned, everybody's well-meaning and wants to make a difference, unless you have got targets and you're prepared to put resource behind it, you are not going to make the change that you're looking for. So one of the things that we talk to organisations about is you've really got to understand the behaviours that are being displayed within your organisation and look at whether you are trying to fix the organisation or whether you are trying to fix the individual. So as Hugh's mentioned, if you've got recruitment processes in place, are you trying to shoehorn people down a process because it works for you without actually understanding what are women looking for when they're applying for jobs? What are people who are neurodiverse looking for? And there are real differences with how men and women are socialised. I'm sure plenty of you have seen this if you're talking to candidates all day long, is that the data and the information tells us that men will typically apply for a job when they hit, 5 or 6 of the criteria on a job description. Women are waiting for 9 or 10 of those criteria, and they'll wait another 6 months. They will get another qualification. They'll think the time's going to be better at a later date before I apply. So you need to start looking at how you educate those individuals and your line managers when they're interviewing, because if they are inbuilt to reduce risk in their recruitment process, they aren't going to take the chance on the diverse candidate. They are going to hire the individual that is more typical to the rest of the organisation. Okay.
That's brilliant. Yeah, that's so true. And a lot of what we focus on is right back at the beginning is that fair by design piece, is thinking about what role are we trying to recruit for and how can we ensure that right from the beginning that it is, fair by that inception period.
If I can maybe add to that as well, is if you want change on DEI, you have to recognise that this is a long-term change you make within your business. It isn't a one-off initiative that says, right, we've got our women or we've got our people of ethnic minorities, we've fixed the problem. If you don't invest in it consistently year after year, you will find that very quickly you go back to your baseline, which is probably majority males within most of the organisations in this room. So it's got to be long-term.
Definitely. And if I can just kind of build on that a little bit, because again, the roundtable that we had that we were on, it did focus around, D&I job boards versus partners. For you, what is to embed a partner within an organisation to get that CEO buy-in? Great, look at the processes. What impact, though, have you seen when that has happened, when you've done that?
Difference, you just see a real difference. So you've got to measure it ultimately. So if I talk about one of the clients that we've worked with long term, which is E.ON, the energy company, we have buy-in from the chief executive. He is invested in making sure that more women get at their talent pipeline. So every single year they commit to developing women who have got aspirations to be on the executive committee, but also they're developing women in middle management so that they're seeing that talent pipeline coming through. What that's meant over recent years is that out of 12 women that E.ON have sent to us recently, 2 of them are now non-executive directors, 4 of them are executive directors on their executive committee, and all but 1 have received at least 1 promotion. The one who hasn't came on our programme last year, so there hasn't been enough time for her to actually get a promotion during that. But ultimately, they put their commitment to making sure that the women go through the promotion process, and ultimately they get the job. You've got to hire them.
It's brilliant, thank you. And James, obviously, head of assessment, thank you, at Omni. And, selection, I'm sure we probably spoke about a little bit about this, selection is a key part of that recruitment infrastructure. When we think about attracting a diverse talent, we do so much in this room to do that, but it can often fall down at that stage, potentially. How can organisations ensure that they are creating a really inclusive selection process? It's a big question.
A nice, simple question that I'll do in 2 minutes. So here's the magic bullet, people. So I think the first thing is, and this is a really important point, inclusion from attraction is about adding stuff. So you can reach out to more people, you engage more people, and in theory, with enough money and enough resource, you could tell every single person in the country about your job. You need a completely different mindset in selection. Selection is about excluding people. So if you've only got one job, you can only hire one person, and the difficulty or the difference in thinking about it is, as opposed to thinking, okay, we want to bring more people in, we want to be more inclusive, you now have to make a decision, and every decision that you make will negatively impact someone else. So for every person you include, if you've got one vacancy, you have to exclude everyone else. So thinking about the infrastructure, it's about prioritising. To Catherine's point, you have to think about what it is you actually want to do, and I have to think about recruitment's complicated, and there are balances and checks. So if you want to be really inclusive, you'd interview everyone that applied for a job, but you're not going to do that because you don't have the resource. So you have to then be really clear in your infrastructure, what is it do I want to achieve? And that is driven top down. That's driven by the organisation. And to Suzanne's point, it's a systems thinking piece. So you build your architecture, you build your infrastructure based on your actual priorities. Now, what I sometimes see is that if we isolate ED&I and go, right, we've got an ED&I agenda here, so we're going to start building architecture around that, and we don't think about hiring manager expectations, we don't think about the cost, we don't think about, can we actually do this? Then what happens is it just breaks down. It becomes a nice tick boxy exercise we report back on and we kind of revisit next year. So it's about producing a system that's fundamentally underpinned by what do we need to have in someone for them to be successful in this role. So the first part, before you work out how you're going to assess someone, how you're going to select someone, work out what you need them to be able to do. And this comes to looking at potential, basically. Now, what you need them to be able to do might be very, very technically skilled. They might need a particular degree for it. So I'm not saying we should discount that. I'm not saying it's just all about behaviour and all the nice things we talk about behaviour, but just being really clear, and then really, really, really importantly, taking everything else out. Everything else goes off the table at that point, because the minute you put in a criteria into that process that isn't an essential criteria, you are unnecessarily limiting your talent pool. So that's the first part. I could talk about that forever. The second part then is building your process around that. And it's building your process. Say, what is the best way for me to identify that thing that I know is important in this role, and to transact candidates through that in a way that they don't drop out as they're going through, to Hugh's point. So the candidate experience becomes really important. How that's exactly done obviously would depend by role. I would say there's a couple of cautionary pieces here. And the first one is about values-based assessment. Be really careful about values-based assessment if it's a whole org value. Look at jobs based on what you require someone to do that job. If you then have a value in your company, which is innovation, and you assess everyone against their ability to innovate, are you going to be excluding certain people and potentially protected groups within that because you think you need them to innovate, but actually you just want them to work in a very procedural role? So we see this a lot with organisations that start imposing well-meaning, nice criteria, but actually aren't relevant to the job at all. The second part is when you're thinking about how to assess, so we'll probably all interview people, we might run assessment centres, or we might pick up one of the emails from the 50 million vendors that are out there at the moment that are promising you ChatGPT-proof, fully inclusive screening tools. It's test it, look at it, and if something comes to you and says it is, well, if anything comes to you and says it removes all unconscious bias, it's just not true. So the first part, if it's promising to do something in 3 minutes and find the best candidates for you, it's just not true. So test and test and test. And then the last two parts, I'll be quick on this, embed it in the organisation. So to the points around hiring managers, we've talked a lot about, you can have the best process in the world. If people don't believe in it, it ain't going to work. And actually, if people don't believe in it, they might start trying to do things to undermine it, to demonstrate to you why they were right in the first place. So you've really, really got to work at that. And I think to Kerry's point earlier, doing it at the point of recruitment is definitely the place to do it. If you go on a course 2 years ago, you've got to remember something about this, it's not relevant anymore. And then lastly, evaluate. And we're going to come to the data, but you have to evaluate it.
Great, thank you. And, so true. I know you're probably going to hate this question, but have you seen it work really well in any certain organisation? So there's a lot to embed there. And I agree, I think one of the biggest factors we look at is once it gets to that hiring manager stage, how can we embed it?
So the challenge with this question is everyone's on a journey and everyone's in different points of a journey. And so there's not kind of one thing we say, right, if you do this, this is going to be relevant to more than probably 2 people in the room. Where I see it work best, where I have seen it work best is organisations that have, so I worked with a facilities management company last year. They had a pretty ad hoc approach to recruitment, quite agency driven. They embedded a more resourcing business partner model because they wanted to have an area of more control and expertise around the resourcing function. And we just top down tore the whole thing up basically. And we said, okay, we're going to redesign a competency framework. We're going to do that by job. We're going to look at how interviews happen, look at all the job adverts. We're going to train all the hiring managers. Really, really basic stuff. This is nothing revolutionary at all. But by doing this and basically holding hiring managers to account on the decision they've made on the back of having much clearer and simpler attraction processes, so taking barriers out of the attraction process, we saw gender, ethnicity massively increase because hiring managers weren't able to make the wrong, well, they were actually able to make the wrong decision. They were encouraged. And it was explained to them why. Taking a slightly more practical element from a way to embed this, there's a piece of technology called Equitas, which came about onto the market. Effectively, it was a video interview platform that you could score in interviews that's going through, and then if anyone's aware of the ORS process, any assessors out there that you observe and then you record and then you classify the information. It's a really structured way that psychs are taught to assess. What this platform does now is it can be used in real time in face-to-face interviews, and what it does, it forces a manager to ask the right question, it forces them to transcribe the answer, and it forces them to then score, but in a really nice, it's easier to do this and not to do it way. So managers automatically start to do this, and then you get much, much more results aligned to those specific skills, competencies, behaviours, attributes, whatever we want to call them, that are related to the job. So there are ways, but mostly it's about building a process that people will buy into.
That's great, thank you. Scott shared with us earlier around the Modern Candidate Experience report that we've recently done, and it showed that, when I get the stats right, 56% of applicants would consider dropping out of the process if it took too long, and close to 60% if there was poor communication. So we spend an awful lot of time getting people into the process, and I suppose the key question is, how can we make sure that we keep them in that process? We don't want to lose them once we've got them in. So a question really to you all, what can we do, or is any insights that you can share in terms of how we can make sure that once they're in the process that we are giving them a great experience? You first.
One of the things that struck me when I saw that data is thinking about queues at amusement parks, and what they do is they are very, very careful to make the queuing experience pleasant. And then people don't complain about the fact they have to wait 2 hours to go on a ride or whatever. So again, thinking about it from a recruitment point of view, actually those two, the length of time and comms are very closely linked. Actually, you'll probably find somebody will be fine with a process that lasts 3 weeks if you're talking to them continuously and having a conversation and making the whole experience engaging, than a process which took 2 weeks but it was complete silence for that entire time.
Yeah, very true, very true. Suzanne, sorry, I think you were going to say something there.
This is for maybe slightly larger organisations. Just make the process a bit human. I want someone to talk to, a named person, please. If things are a bit slowed down, people haven't made a decision, give me an email, send me an update. These are so obvious in terms of human interaction, but I can tell you in terms of the work that we've been doing with Omni, and I've experienced myself, it really does make a difference, particularly to diverse groups who are very likely to sometimes drop off between the various sifting stages of your process. So really keeping that communication going. And as part of that, we were talking on our table with Suzanne also about feedback from the different stages. For those people who may well be, because of your diversity, inclusion ambitions, they may well be the only X person in that team. So actually being quite honest about the environments they're going into, give them a bit of feedback from what they had before, or being quite honest and preparing them for that stages. Once again, our feedback has been really high for our candidate experience because we've had that loop of human interaction going throughout.
Definitely. You can't underestimate the power of that human engagement, can you? James, Catherine, anything else to add, do you think?
I'd say I've worked in recruitment for 25 years and we're still talking about the same thing, which is communication and feedback, and nothing seems to have moved on. So I think it is key. It's those two things really matter to candidates because they give the best experience of your business. But also, I would say really look at what you're doing to evaluate the skills and how you bring people into the business, because as Suzanne's mentioned, individuals from diverse groups are less schooled in how to do things like psychometric assessments. So if you're making something like a psychometric assessment an early part of your selection process, you are going to see candidates drop off. Ultimately, feedback's often not provided as to how people did in that process as well. So perhaps offer a concierge service whereby you've got an individual of the team that's available to actually help people and get them prepared for interview or the selection criteria that you've actually got, because you'll start to see people are better prepared, perform better at interview, and therefore you're much more likely to hire a diverse individual.
This sort of ties into what I was saying about different levels of knowledge and experience. When you're talking about diverse audiences, if you ignore somebody for 2 weeks, if they've applied for 500 jobs and they know that's just what happens, it won't impact them as much as somebody who's uncertain, not sure what's going on, and they think, oh, well, if they're not talking to me, I'd better go somewhere else. So you lose them.
Yeah, I agree with all that. If you are using a psychometric assessment as a decision-making factor for the early stage in your process, come and have a chat with me anyway, because I think that probably needs a review. I think as well, looking at the process, so what I would call face validity, what normal people would call just understanding why you're doing each part of the process. So as you're going through a process, if I'm applying to be whatever at a company, and all of a sudden I'm given a diagrammatic test and I have no idea why that is, you are likely to fall out. You're likely to see more people falling out of that process. It's also really important to look where people are falling out of the process. You can get loads of information, and one of the areas that I see at the moment that I think, I have seen no research on this, I'm trying very hard to find it. I think that asynchronous video interviews, so interviews where you're asked questions and you have to pay a video back, it looks to me, based on some reasonably anecdotal data I've seen from a number of companies, adversely impacts female and people from some ethnic backgrounds. So basically people are dropping out, they're choosing not to take that assessment, they're dropping out before it gets there. Now, I can't state that, and if there's anyone from Highview in here, I apologise. But the point of that is, it's about saying, OK, well, we're trying to transact people through. We can see people dropping off. Now, what often happens when we're reporting about where people are going through a process, we can say, well, 27% of people that went through this process passed it off, male or female. We need to look at 27% of the people that were invited to take this process. So if they drop out before, we need to know where they drop out. And then just making a human experience, making them understand. And something doesn't have to be stuffy and overly corporate to be professional. You can be professional and kind. You can be professional and personable. And I think that organisations that do that do it much better. And people choose the job. Partly that you have to pay them enough. So money, one of the things we talk about on the table, money is very important right now. But people would choose a job because they like the process. They liked the interviewer. They liked what they saw. So it's a cliche, but you're being interviewed as much as you are interviewing.
Very true. That's great. Thank you. I think we're running out of time, but I do want to finish on one last question that actually came up from the kind of last conversation with Kerry and Louise as well around data. And it's something that we all wanted to talk about anyway. But the question I suppose, thinking about a broader subject of how important is data when you are approaching your organisation to change a part of that recruitment infrastructure. And then the question that we were asked, which I think is a great question, is how do we ensure and how do we measure diversity across all underrepresented groups? Not just gender, for instance. So how do we do that? And Suzanne, can I come to you, because the question I think was aimed at Kerry initially, so I'm bypassing it on to you. Sorry.
Thanks.
But yeah, because it is important when we think about data and measurement. So what measurement is out there that you can share? Any insight?
So this is a bit of a hot topic because I've set that as one of our year 3 priorities of our D&I strategy. And so for us, we started with a key measure of a target, which we kind of analyse regionally and UK-wide to kind of ensure that that's appropriate. But now we're digging in terms of different stages of the recruitment process, as well as different outcomes of our wider systems and processes to see how that tracks. So in terms of recruitment, obviously these are the stages that you usually monitor: the applied, the sifting, and the various stages of the sift. But I'm also interested in how many people are accessing learning opportunities, the onboarding experience, everything, because it's we see very different experiences sometimes between groups in terms of how they will react and engage. So, for example, for minority ethnic communities, often in the organisations I've worked for, the engagement scores are through the roof. In terms of, I've mainly worked in public sector, so it might be different elsewhere, through the roof, really high. But then when you kind of dig in to certain systems and processes, you then really see that, but hang on, how comes they're dropping off at this stage of recruitment? How comes they're not accessing this aspect of learning? So it's important to take that whole systems approach.
Yeah, I love that. Thinking about everything, not just the recruitment process, but it's everything that comes before and after as well. That's really good.
Yeah, what you said about siloing was really interesting. So we run a platform for the 10,000 Interns Foundation, and I think Kerry mentioned the 10,000 Black Interns program, which was their first one, and then this year they're doing the 10,000 Able Interns. Next year they're going to be launching a program focused on people from disadvantaged backgrounds. But what they've already started to realise is you can't just put people into these neat boxes. You know, what if you've got somebody who's black from a disadvantaged background? How do you engage with them? And so it was something I was talking earlier today with somebody about. You almost need to turn it around and treat everybody as an individual with various diverse requirements. And the more flexible you can be, and the more you can try not to put them into those silos, the better it will be.
Definitely. James?
Sometimes I see that organisations will proudly evangelise, boast about how their percentage of diverse hires they have made over a certain period of time. It's nonsense. So everyone in this room could choose a characteristic, I'm pretty sure, at some point. So I'm a middle-aged white guy from this country. I may have some neurodiversity. I was born in a council house, so socioeconomic. Everyone is a diverse person, and to Hugh's point, everyone is diverse. So when reporting on this and when looking at this, it's about focusing, as Suzanne was saying, on the specifics. And I know I've seen the very impressive statistics from Ofcom and how minutely this is broken down to say, okay, well, this group and this group and this group, what's the impact? So just be really careful, I think, in terms of data. If we bundle everyone in there and say, well, you're a woman, so you're diverse, and you're the same to us actually as someone that's in a wheelchair, and you're the same to us as someone that's from wherever and doing whatever, and you're the same to us as an LGBTQ person, just be really careful with that and use the data that's meaningful. So if it is a specific issue you have around gender within engineering, there are certain things you can do, and you can push the button on that and you can measure it. So I think that's my thinking around that.
That's great, thank you. I suppose, Catherine, adding a different weight to that, thinking about it from maybe a succession planning perspective, internal mobility.
So from succession planning, I would suggest everybody here looks at the executive committee within the business that they work in, and I would look at what is the diversity on the executive committee. And I would ask yourself and ask the business some really hard-hitting questions. So based on what your makeup currently looks like, ask the business, when will it have the first female executive committee member, or when will the business have its first black executive committee member? And I think those are really powerful questions to actually get your organisation thinking, actually, when is that going to be? And if you think that the route to CEO is going to be through either the FD or the CFO role, or it's going to be a P&L role, look at what are the diversity within those two strands of the business, but also look at it within key departments as well. Because if you're then focusing on who have you got coming through that talent pipeline, you can start to look at where your gaps are going to be and actually put some support into helping those individuals advance their careers within your business. Because ultimately, people cannot get there on their own. If they did, the top of your organisation would look very different. We don't have a meritocracy. So start thinking about the best person for the team, and the best person for the team is going to be the person that you don't already have. So if that's 4 men, add a woman to it. If it's 4 white people, add a person of ethnicity to that team. So make sure it starts to look different, and work with all your hiring managers so that they start to address the biases, as Kerry said, at the point that you're going to make the hire, because you'll start to examine then the risks that people won't take on behalf of others.
That's great, thank you. I think we're officially out of time, even though there's probably loads of other questions, and I have a feeling we might have some more questions that have come in.
Absolutely. Should we give a round of applause first?
Yes, thank you.